Welcome back to our Franchise Fundamentals series, where we're hoping to help you break down everything involving franchising to give you a very good idea on if franchising is going to be good for you. Now, in today's episode, we're going to be going through the FDD, or the Franchise Disclosure Document. So first, we're going to explain what it is. Then we're going to go through some key sections to pay attention to. And then lastly, how to analyze, and then also some red flags to watch out for. So what is the FDD? The FDD, or the Franchise Disclosure Document, is a standardized document that every single franchisor in the country has to create and then update every single year. So the whole point of the FDD is to take the franchise business offering, and break it down into standardized sections or items that allow for you, a potential franchise candidate, to compare multiple different franchise brands, no matter what industry they're in, as close to apples as possible. Now, the FDD is a legal document and it's very lengthy. They can be hundreds of pages long, but they're designed to be written with as little legalese as possible, and really for a franchise candidate who isn't a lawyer to be able to read through and really get an idea of exactly what the business offering looks like. These FDDs are federally regulated by the FTC, and usually a franchisor submits their universal FDD, and the majority of states recognize it. Now, there are 13 states that are called registration states that require their own individualized evaluation of this document. So if you're in a registration state, you're going to see some differences with your FDD compared to the national one, but that might be conversation for a different episode, but just want to give you an idea that there is a universal FDD, but some states do require a specific overview of exactly what the offering is. So just look out for that if you are in a registration state. So let's talk about some key sections or items within the FDD. Now, the FDD has 23 specific items that are universal across the board. Of course, they're all important, but there's a select number that I like to highlight for franchise candidates to pay a special attention to, because in my opinion, those are the most pertinent to the actual business and allow for you to make an educated decision if you understand these specific sections. The first section that I want to highlight is item 1, or the franchisor's background information. So this is a very easy to digest section that really just goes through who are the people behind the brand. Who's ultimately going to be responsible for my business and my financial well-being? So this includes backgrounds of the founder or anyone on the C-board who's in charge behind the scenes. This also includes how long the franchisor has been in business, and also if there's any other brands that the franchisor is associated with, because you want to know if they also own a competitor in the local market. That's important information for you to have as a franchisee. So that's all disclosed in section 1, or item 1 of the FDD. The second item that I want to highlight is item 3. Now, item 3 goes over any active or past litigation that the franchisor or any of its owners have been a part of. So this includes disputes with other brands. This includes disputes with current franchisees. Sometimes there's been class action lawsuits against the franchisor. So obviously you want to know that, and that's why it's disclosed here. And it also allows for any issues that they're having with suppliers or distributors, because if they're not paying their suppliers to get the product, you want to know that, because that can obviously have an effect on your potential business. So all of that is outlined in section 3. One piece I do want to say here, and this is not in defense of bad brands, but just because there are lawsuits against a franchisor doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad or they do bad business practices, but it is important for you to know what litigation they are involved with. So they have to disclose it in this section, and you want to make sure to address that with the franchisor as you're talking with them and allow them to give their perspective on what's going on. But if they do have a lengthy list of litigation, it's usually a red flag that you at least want to consider before moving forward. Moving on to the next section, item 6. Now, item 6 breaks down all of the fees that you are going to see as a potential franchisee. So this spans everything from royalty to technology fees, brand funds, anything that you're going to inherit as a cost or an ongoing fee being a franchisee in the system, that's all going to be broken down in the item 6. So this section allows you to have a really good idea of not only what you're going to be spending in terms of a dollar amount, but when the payment is due. So if a royalty is going to be collected weekly with one brand versus monthly with another, not saying that either of those are better or worse, but it's important for you to know exactly how that factors in. Because if your business, just say you're in restoration and you have a lot of net 60, 90 payments where you have to front all of the labor costs, and then the franchisor says, well, we collect royalties on a weekly basis, so you have to front all the labor costs and pay weekly royalties on money that you haven't even seen. That's something that you want to pay attention to. Now, I'm using that as a rough example. Most brands in that space, they pay the royalty once the dollars are collected. But again, that's something important for you to figure into as you're analyzing the item 6. It's not just about what the fees are, but it's the schedule in which they're due to the franchisor. Again, so you have a better idea of what your experience is going to look like. Next is the item 7, or the estimated initial startup cost. This section is broken down by line item format, and it gives you a totality picture in terms of what it's going to cost to not only open the franchise location, but ultimately get it to being cash flow positive. So one misconception about this section is, okay, this is the check that I'm going to sign on day one. All that money goes out and gets allocated, and now I have to float the business until, it's making money for me. And that's not the case. Part of the item 7 is cash reserves. That's one aspect of the initial investment that they want to break down. So the franchisor understands that this initial investment is assuming to get you to cash flow positivity so that you hopefully don't have to inject any additional cash into the business. This is the total amount that they have outlaid for you to have in order to get the business to cash flow positivity and then allow it to be self-sustaining. So usually involved in this is 3 months of cash reserves, 3 to 6 months of rent or lease payments on any vehicles, any insurance premiums. All that's usually factored in. But regardless, it is going to vary based on the brand that you're looking at and what they've decided to put into their item 7. So pay attention to what additional cash reserves they have outlaid within that section. Now, when you're looking at this item, you're going to see that there is almost always going to be a range, and a lot of times it can be a vast range of what the initial startup cost is going to be. For a home service brand, they might have a range of $150,000 to $400,000 for the initial investment. So you might look at that and say, okay, well, that's not very helpful because that's a huge, swing in terms of the low and high end. So what's my number going to be? Well, one thing that might attribute to that is whether you're going to purchase equipment outright or if you're going to lease or finance that equipment. So again, it's not necessarily saying that there's this drastic swing in the total cost, but the franchisor may want to give you that range to say, hey, if you're comfortable leveraging a little bit more and financing the trucks out and not being as cash heavy in the beginning, here's what this is going to look like. Versus, I want to pay everything cash. I don't want to have any loans. I want to, start with no debt. Okay, well, then you're going to be on the higher end of the spectrum. So that's one reason why you can see such a range within this part of the item 7. Additionally, it's going to be based on geographic location. So the FDD has to be a umbrella coverage for the entirety of the US. And if you're looking to start the business in New York City or San Francisco, it's obviously going to cost more than if you start the business in a remote town in the Midwest that, doesn't come close in terms of actual cost of living compared to one of these major metros. So that's another factor that you're going to have to weigh in to understand what your specific initial costs and investments are going to be is geographic location. Where am I at? That's a part of a conversation you want to have with the brand because they're going to be able to give you a better insight if they do have a fairly large range of where you fall within that spectrum, specifically with your geographic location. The next section is, in my opinion, one of the most important sections for you to look at, and that is the item 19, or the earnings claim portion. So within this item, a franchisor is able to show you or give you real financial metrics of actual units within their system. Now, before you make any assumptions when you're looking at these, I like to say that the item 19 is a snapshot. It is not a full picture. And what I mean by that is there's no requirements as to what a franchisor can show, with the only one being it has to be real information. So they can't say in there that they're projecting that you're going to make $1 million a year if they've never had that happen within their system. They can't just make egregious claims of what they think is going to happen. They have to base it on actual data that they have within their franchise system. But after that assumption is made, there's no requirement. So a franchisor can show you a full P&L breakdown of one specific location where you have top line revenue, bottom line profit, all the expenses outlaid. Very, very good to get that information. But if it's only for a single location and they have hundreds, it's not really representative of the system as a whole. In addition to that, a brand can say, hey, here's the average revenue for all our locations. We have 150 locations, and here's the quartile breakdown of all our performers, and the average of everything is, they do 1.1 million on average across the board. That's great. But what's the actual profit margin on that? Because if it costs over $1 million to actually operate the business and get it to do 1.1 million, there's not a lot of meat left on the bone after it's all said and done. So seeing averages, again, is good, just like seeing a P&L is good, but it doesn't show the whole picture. And finally, the franchisor can have nothing in their item 19. They can actually say within their item 19, we don't make any financial claims or representations of what a franchisee can make. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Some of the top brands in the country do not have an item 19. For whatever reason, it could be that the costs vary greatly. It could be that the industry is very specialized and not everybody can really turn a profit unless they have a specific background. It doesn't really matter what the case is. All that matters is that you understand that the item 19 is not a full picture. Now, it is a good representation given good information. So if you see an item 19 that has an average system-wide of all locations in terms of revenue and profits, and the numbers look healthy, that's a good sign, because that means that it is a true collective of what a potential location can do. Now, again, that doesn't mean that you are going to do that. It's not a promise that this is the amount of money that you can make. It's just based on real metrics within their system. Now, as you're looking at the item 19, I always like to parlay that in terms of due diligence with validation calls. And that's when you get a chance to call as many current franchisees as you'd like and ask them any question you want about their experience within the franchise organization. Anything from what their profitability is, how their startup looked, what was their ramp up period like, how's the training and support. But you're able to ask franchisees as comfortably as you'd like, how much money are you making? Like, are you profitable? What's your profit margin? Is it hard to do that? What do I need to know for myself to get to that profitability? So the validation calls are going to be vitally important in addition to the item 19 to really get an understanding of what you could potentially make within this business model. And the last section that I want to highlight is the item 20. So the item 20 gives a few pieces of information, but it's really to show the trend of the growth or shrinkage of the franchise company in totality. So what it is a net change year over year of the franchisor in terms of number of units over the past 3 years. So if you have a system that, say, has 1,000 units, it's huge. They're everywhere. But you see in the item 20 that they've lost 100 units in 3 years ago, 50 units 2 years ago, and another 100 last year. That's a straight decline. That means that they are losing at a rate that they can't overgrow, which is not a good sign, right? If a system is that good, they should be maintaining. They shouldn't be losing franchisees. In addition to that, if you look at the item 20 and they currently have 100 units, and last year they added 98. Okay, well, they added all of their units last year. Those locations haven't been up and running for long enough for you to really get an idea, or for them to know what the potential is in this business on a more mass scale. So you get a lot of good information about the trend of the business. again, just talking about trends, that also might be that they have a really good proof of concept and they're in that hockey stick part of their growth curve. So it's not that you just look at the item 20 for bad things. It can also be a good indicator that the brand is growing at a healthy rate and there's a lot of attraction to the model, which is obviously a good sign. But the item 20 gives you that trend in terms of where's the system going? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Is it staying status quo? You get all that information within the item 20. And then in the next section, you're able to see specifically based on the state what those changes look like. So you get a high level overview of the system in its whole, and then there's a state by state breakdown. So then you could see, okay, well, of your California locations, 75% of them closed in the past 3 years. So if I'm in California, what's going on there? And is this really going to make sense for me given the model is not doing well in that specific state? So now that you have an idea on what sections you should spend the most amount of time analyzing, let's move into how to analyze the FDD. Now, as I mentioned before, it's designed to not be a super legalese heavy document. It's supposed to be able to be read by your common layman. But it's still a very lengthy, dense document that if you're not working with these documents every single day, it can be very overwhelming to really understand how to read it. So the first thing I always like to say is take your time. Legally, a franchisor, once they give you their FDD, you need to have it for 2 full weeks before you're even legally able to make a decision. Okay, so the Fed wants you to have it for 2 weeks to really have time to digest it and understand the information that's in there. Now, yes, you can read the information on your own, and if you are inept, you can definitely understand the FDD with the information that's provided. But of course, my recommendation is always to speak with the franchise attorney. They will be able to tell you what the words mean. So, of course, there's what the words say and what the words mean. The franchise attorney will be able to have a better conversation with you to really highlight some specific language that they have seen be problematic, or language that seems problematic, but they know in their experience isn't. It's standard, literature, standard language wording within the document. So always advise to speak with the franchise attorney in order to have a really good conversation about specific sections of the FDD and what they mean. With that being said, during the development process or the time that you're speaking with the franchisor to really get a good understanding of what their business model is and if it's going to be a good fit for you, brands are going to have a specific call that's going to review the FDD. So you've had it for 2 weeks, you've talked to the franchise attorney. Now you're going to talk directly with the brand and address anything that you have questions about. Because if you do see something that's alarming, maybe the financials aren't exactly what you hope they would be, or there is litigation with the franchisor and a few of their franchisees, or they have been downwardly trending over the past 3 years with their item 20, the call with the franchisor is designed for you to express those concerns or questions that you have, and the franchisor is obviously going to answer them for you. So you do have a dedicated time within that development period to talk directly with the franchisor and express any questions or concerns that you might have about the information that's within the document. And the last section I want to go over are some red flags to pay attention to. Now, red flag doesn't mean that it's inherently bad, but it's something that you want to address with the franchisor. So the first is within the item 6, if you notice that there are any fees, but more specifically the royalty, that seems high compared to some other models that you're looking at, you want to make sure you understand what you're getting, because ultimately the royalty is what you're paying for with the franchise system. So if the franchisor is providing unmatched success or training support to help you be successful, it may make sense that the royalty is a little bit higher. But at the end of the day, the royalty is going to be a huge chunk of your money that's going to be sent to the franchisor system. So you want to pay attention to the royalty fee and not only what it is, but what you're getting for it. The next piece that I really like to highlight is the item 20. And that's where, again, you can see the trend in terms of number of units. It's not to say that if a brand is downwardly trending, it should absolutely not be looked at, but it is a red flag. If a system is working, they should not be closing locations, and they should definitely not have a net loss in franchisees. So that is something that I would highly pay attention to, even if you have an iconic brand that is everywhere. If you're noticing that over the past 3 years, they've been rapidly losing franchisees, it's just a sign that you want to dig a little bit deeper to see what's going on there. So that's a pretty full breakdown on what the FDD is, what important sections to pay attention to, and ultimately how to analyze the document. The FDD is a very important document if you're looking into a franchise system, especially early on, because it gives you a really good view, at least on a black and white level, of what this business is. Take away all the marketing, take away the branding, take away the excitement, the black and white, boring information. Here's what our system looks like on paper. That's what the document is. It's supposed to be for you to evaluate not only this brand, but multiple different brands in different industries, as close to apples as possible, so you can make an educated decision. Yes, this brand might not make as much as brand A, might not make as much as brand B based on item 19, but the startup cost is so much lower for brand A. I want to scale this into a big business, and I want to be mindful of what my cash outlay is going to be. All these factors are going to be able to be evaluated as you're looking at these FDDs together. So that's all we have for this video. If you like this information, make sure to move on to our next video, video 5, and that's going to be due diligence and how to do research on a franchise model. See you in the next video.